Okay, let's see, how is this working? This is the first stream with the new computer, so bear with me if there are any problems, but I don't expect there to be much in the way of problems because we took a massive technological upgrade, and I think that it will show even in this. So without further ado, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. If you hate the content, you can unsubscribe later, but it will help boost the algorithm. We have a great show tonight. We are going to talk about a wonderful discussion that was on Karen Wong's meaning code. She has a pretty small channel. It's bigger than mine, so, you know, but it definitely deserves more followers. She's had some great discussions. I think we've talked about other streams that she has done as well. Please let me know in the chat how the audio is coming through, how the images look, how, you know, the video is, if it's choppy, if it's not. Just, you know, trying to get a sense of how things are looking with the new stream. But let's see here. All right. So, guys, the technological upgrade that we took cannot be overstated, and I think that will be evident even in just this simple stream, let alone in the future when we can live stream, you know, doing 3D renders and editing them in real time. You know, I honestly think that we could do that with this kind of power, but and that is kind of in the plan. So here we go. Gosh, it's so fast. So this is the stream that we are going to be discussing. Now you should be able to see the channel that we are going to be looking at, the meaning code. And this is the stream that we are going to discuss. It is with Wolfgang Smith, and it is on vertical causation and, you know, theism in science and all kinds of different, you know, fascinating topics. So, let's see here. All right, let me know in the chat how that looks now, though. It should be much better. The fact that I could even fix that in real time is a step up, but, you know, I knew something was going to go wrong on the first stream. So, Wolfgang Smith is somebody that I wanted to do a review of a stream on for a while. I was introduced to him by watching Kirchheim Mungel's channel. He's done 2 incredibly deep interviews with him. He is a Christian. He is a philosopher. He is a physicist. He is a mathematician. He, I believe, went to MIT as a teenager. Let's see here. So, share screen. Wow, now it's working. All right, born 1930, graduated in 1948 from Cornell with a bachelor's degree, I guess, in philosophy, physics, and mathematics, all 3. 2 years later, he combined his master's, I'm guessing, in physics from Purdue University, and sometime later, PhD in physics from Columbia. I think he went to school at like college at like 16 or 15 years old. It doesn't say here, but Smith's understanding of the relationship between corporeal and physical objects extends his interpretation of biology, and he has become a fierce opponent, essentially, of Darwinian evolution as a fundamental element in a species would be its form, not its causal history. Well, we're going to talk about that tonight because I really am become a big, I don't like the word fan, but almost fan of a lot of the things that he says. It's amazing to me that someone with a PhD basically in degrees in physics and philosophy and mathematics, all of those can be so decorated in academia, is also completely, I feel like, ignored by the scientific community. But I don't think that that is going to last very long because of, discussions that are being had online. So let me see. Like I said, please, hit the like button, comment in the chat. Hey, everyone, please comment in the chat and hit the like button. All right, cool. Guys, I'm amazed at this computer. I'm going to talk about it, throughout the stream, the next few streams probably. There shouldn't be any more instances of me clicking pause and then it not pausing, and then me start talking and then it pauses, and then I have to click it again and then it unpauses. Any of that lagging should not be an issue anymore, but we will see. This is the first test. So first clip on scientism and how scientism is misleading, and how ancient philosophers were smarter than modern ones. This is something that I very much agree with, but okay, hold on.
Not only what science has to offer, but how it is presently misunderstood and thus misleading humanity. This is something that I have been very concerned about for a long time, that in the name of science we're being led into very, very serious errors, which have implications in all aspects of life. I distinguish sharply between what I call scientism and science. Science is the real thing. Scientism claims to be science, but is really ideology-driven. And so in a sense, I am interested in making our society more wary of scientism, and by the same token, open again to the great wisdom of mankind. I do not believe that the ancients were all intellectually inferior to us. On the contrary, I think it's to a large extent the other way around. And so I'm interested in re-establishing, to the extent that it is possible, some of the ancient wisdom of mankind. So that's about the rough summary of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. So we are going to get even better with the audio that goes on, on these streams. Instead of streaming the audio from my microphone, we will stream it directly from the video now that we have the bandwidth to do it. Probably next week, so that might help even more. But this is what he is claiming here is his basic drive and mission, and the overall arching theme of his intellectual pursuits is something that I'm seeing more commonly, which is good. But it's not that it hasn't existed, but it has changed in how it's being done. It's not in the past, I feel like it's been done more by trying to enforce dogma on people through institutions and I guess organized religion, and that has, I think, backfired pretty severely, as we can see, by the growing atheism or identified atheism or truly anti-theism that is rampant in everyone who is going through the education system. But this mission is very similar to even the one of this channel, and I think that it is a noble one. But one of the things that he said there, which is just so funny to me, is I hear this all the time, that people were just ignorant in the past, and I think that we are so much more ignorant today than they were in the past. And the reason for this is a lack of firsthand experience with anything. Everything today that causes people to feel like they are wiser or smarter than people of the past comes from things that they've learned secondhand in school. It's not coming from things that they learned firsthand in person. And we're taking people out of the real world more and more, out of the meaningful world more and more, in order to, quote unquote, educate them. And then that further detaches them from having a true sense of where they stand, as far as wisdom and I would say smartness goes. But smartness, to me, there's intelligence and there's smartness and wisdom, and they're kind of, smartness, I would say, is kind of the intersection between the two, between wisdom and intelligence. But I think that people are getting dumber. It's funny, just a side tangent, because that's what, is common here. But if you've ever seen Idiocracy, I heard recently this week that the shoes in Idiocracy are Crocs, and they weren't popular yet, but now they're like popular everywhere. And I understand why they're popular, but it's just funny because we do seem to be devolving. That, people say Idiocracy is real, that comedy movie basically about how the future of the world of humanity is a everybody just gets dumber and dumber, which makes a lot of sense when you see and you look around at all kinds of birth rates and trends in society and things like that. And we are definitely, I think we reached the height of human intelligence already, probably. That's naturally emergent. I'm not saying we couldn't, do things genetically. I'm not saying that's a good idea. It's not a good idea. But China just tried to make, 2 baby girls more intelligent a few years ago with CRISPR. So, but that's gonna backfire. But we're definitely decreasing in our understanding of the world, in our wisdom, particularly because, like I said, we're taking people out of the real world, and we're putting them in schools where they're just taught secondhand information all the time. And this is a kind of a primary focus of sentient singularity theory, and my work involving, cognition and information, is that there must be a prioritization of firsthand information or experience above secondhand information that is, just translated and told and heard without actually being experienced. So, the more schooling people have, the less wise they're likely to be. So that is just something to really think about. That's just the logic of the situation. Next clip. We're going to try and move kind of quickly, but because we got started a bit late. This next clip is about this icon that he has that represents vertical causation. I just paused the video and it paused immediately. That is huge, guys. But and he's going to talk about vertical causation, and this is something that is also in sentient singularity theory of focus. I've never called it vertical causation, but we'll explain it in a minute. But it is critical to understanding the world. Hierarchies are hierarchies that are true hierarchies are hierarchies of causation, and the hierarchies of causation are vertical because that is what a hierarchy is. So here we go. Next clip.
Yes.
In your book, The Vertical Ascent, you talk about this picture of the cosmos as having the center and then the, there we go, the center and then the margin, the perimeter of the circle. And one of my questions is, could we look at this from a 3D perspective and see the center as being a pinnacle?
Well, I classify it as an icon. And an icon, of course, is a way of presenting metaphysical truth in a very simple, abbreviated visual form. So I think we should keep it two-dimensional and try to understand the ontology which it expresses. I have a sense that this icon was really known in ancient times. I have a feeling that, for example, the students in Plato's Academy were somehow acquainted with that icon. It was never written down, so far as I know, but I don't consider it an invention. I consider it an icon that is simply there and very helpful if we try to understand the ultimate ontology of the cosmos. Because the cosmos has three parts: a center, an intermediary realm, and a circumference. And all the world that we know through our ordinary life, our five senses, is just that circumference. There's this vast intermediary realm that we normally do not experience, and then there is a center, which also we normally experience only in a very, very partial way. So it's a symbolic representation of the integral cosmos, which is tripartite. And the easiest way to explain why it is tripartite is because man himself is tripartite. Corpus, anima, spiritus are the Latin words. And so, just as we are tripartite, so is the cosmos.
And
Okay, so lots to unpack there, but we've talked about this tripartite nature of reality. We before on this channel many times. It's seen everywhere. It's seen in the triality of the Standard Model. It's seen in religion, in the Trinity, in Christianity. It's seen in space-time with past, present, and future as far as time, and then length, width, and height as far as space goes, or X, Y, Z. This trialic, this three-dimensional perception that we have of everything is due to the dimensions of mind that help us process information. So I've showed this on here before, but anytime that you're processing information, there are three actions that are taken in order to process that information. And because of that, that causes the world to split three ways every time that we go and we look at something. You look at colors and it's like the three primary colors, and then you look at the secondary colors and there's three of those, and then you look at, even your arm, and it's like, or your limbs, and it's like arms and legs, hands and feet, and fingers and toes, and it's just split three different ways. Anytime you try and zoom in on something, you're seeing this fractaling, tripartite, structure, and that's due to the constraints of mind. But even thought, speech, and action, how we interact with anything, with the world, is through thought, speech, and action. So, but this interesting icon that he has here is fascinating, because one of the things that I realized in sentient singularity theory regarding the cosmological verse, which is this structure right here, is that it is chiral, which means like you can't really split it down the middle. You can see that the tip of the beginning here is offset from the end here, so you can't split it straight in half. But what's interesting, though, is that if you do want to kind of see it from not a chiral perspective or an asymmetric perspective, and you want to look at it symmetrically, you have to look at it from a different perspective, which is from the center out. And if you look at this from the center out, you can see that there is this quadratic center, which, there's four fundamental forces, and there's four primary perspectives that are the center, sentient singularity theory, inside, outside, separate, and oneness. They are the foundations of relationships, the foundational relationships, or the foundational perceptions that lead to, 4D space-time, for fundamental forces, for chord songs, all kinds of things like that. But this is a center, and when you do that, you realize that this is a symmetrical structure if you look at it from the center out. And so the thing is, though, is that this is how the cosmos must be examined from two different perspectives at once. One from the center out, which is kind of the constant, eternal, instantaneous, outside time, causal realm, I guess you could say. And then there's also this vertical causation, or this hierarchy of beings that is how the cosmos unfolds, basically. And it, with God is at the very top, and you could also say he's at the very bottom. You could also say he's at the very center, but then if you say he's at the very center, then you have to use a 3D model to kind of like visualize emergence. But if you say he's at the very top or the very bottom, you can see that it kind of builds these levels where a hadron is, assembly of quarks, an atom is an assembly of hadrons, a molecule is an assembly of atoms. So these are these 7 or 8 levels, depending on how you count them. And they're stacked on top of each other because they are built on top of each other. There is a vertical causation here. The family contains the individual organism unit, like human, which contains cells, which contains molecules, and there is a hierarchy to this structure, essentially. And this hierarchical aspect of reality is necessary to understand in order to understand reality, because it is part of truth. But the thing is that figuring out this hierarchy is tough for physicists because they're so trapped in space-time that they're focused on size. So if you see people trying to come up with a theory of everything all the time, it's like atom, molecule, cell, organism, planet, and then, galaxy or solar system, then galaxy, and then universe. This is focused on size. So this is not a fundamental theory because it is built on the axiom of size already, existing as an axiom or as a presupposition. And that is not fundamental. So you have to go through a lineage, and what a based, model instead of a size-based model. And a lineage-based model is that, organisms come from cells, an assembly of cells. Cells are an assembly of molecules. Molecules are an assembly of atoms. Atoms are an assembly of hadrons, etc. So, but what this shows is it shows a causative chain, a chain of causality that has a hierarchy to it. And, whoever causes the next level is ultimately has, I guess you could say, dominion over them. But the thing is that it's multifaceted when it's fundamental. So, you do have dominion over your cells. You have sovereignty over every cell in your body, and but at the same time you are accountable to them too. And that is something that is true of the entire cosmos. Everyone needs. Only God is the only one who doesn't need anyone else in order to exist. He does need us for meaning, but he doesn't need us for existence. This is why vertical causality isn't even really in the conversation in science in most of the time, because you have to focus on beings in order to realize and discuss the logic of an inherent hierarchy to the universe. And we, in our, contemporary scientific narratives, assume that beings emerge randomly, essentially, from sludge that pre-existed beings. And that's, there's no logic to that when you look at things comprehensively. But I understand why people do go down that road, because I did. But you have to, there's also this other side of this, and regarding this vertical causality that makes it kind of unappealing to people, because it means that you have someone who has ultimate control over your being, and they are accountable to you, but you ultimately they are in control, and that is just the reality. And we don't like that, because who wants to be controlled by others consciously, subconsciously maybe, but not consciously. And there's many other reasons why this is kind of not thought of. But it's interesting, though, that there is, in this structure that I mapped, there was this linear aspect to it, and then there was this center out aspect to it that I found eventually as well when I was examining the symmetries of it. It's not symmetrical if you're just, cutting it in half. But it is symmetrical if you're starting from the center out. And I think that this icon here is kind of trying to show something similar. And I thought that was very interesting. Anyways, next clip. I've talked about this, about psychedelics on here before. People ask me all the time, what do you think about psychedelics and machine elves and everything like that? And I've never had any kind of intoxicated experience with beings, angels or demons or machine elves or whatever you want to call them. And I have had, experiences that were sober that, once I've talked about before on here, where I had kind of a theophany, but that was not intoxicated. But I know that a lot of people want to explore psychedelics as a tool to, perceive the divine, essentially. And I understand why that they would want to do that, but I do think that there are downsides to that, and it's dangerous, and he's going to talk a bit about it here. But we'll talk more about it. It's very common today to take the shortcut, and that psychedelics are the shortcut.
When people take psychedelics, do you think that they somehow access this intermediary realm?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about it. And all I can say is it's a terribly, terribly dangerous thing to do, because it's real, and the entities that inhabit it are also real. I will mention in passing that at one point I met Father Malachi Martin, the famous author and exorcist, on a radio program, and somehow the conversation turned to the intermediary realm. And when I said that he knew all about it, he said, yes, I call it the middle plateau, because that's where you do the exorcism. You actually communicate with the demonic world from the intermediary realm. So he knew how to access that realm, and had done it many, many times in his exorcisms.
So the one of the things that fascinates me about this icon is that this idea of the.
Okay, so I know that's, he didn't really say anything that I didn't. Other than a personal account, but it is important, I think, to talk about this more, because it's becoming increasingly common to just, try and go the psychedelic route when it comes to having a divine experience. And, here's the thing. You don't need... I have had an experience that was, it was sober, and yet it was basically a DMT. It was like the most intense DMT experience you could ever have. It's like the DMT experience that you could want, but I wasn't on DMT. I was just taking a shower. And I've talked about this before. And how I was visualizing like the structure of the universe, and then I saw it, and then wept on the floor. But I was thinking about what I was imagining what I then saw. It was I wasn't seeing anything that I didn't understand. It wasn't anything new to me that I couldn't have already imagined logically and thought about logically. It was something that I had already deduced. I wasn't shown anything that I hadn't figured out. And I got a message, from, like, I believe a giant glowing white light that I believe to be God. And it just said, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. And I don't talk about this very often on here, but I have mentioned it, but I try and keep it like reserved to like specific instances in which it's relevant, because you have to treat these experiences with reverence. It's not just fun, to glimpse into basically the heavens, the spirit world, whatever you want to call it. It's the substructure of reality. It's the realm of consciousness that is not so bound, physically. It's just a different frequency than we normally can see. That's what I believe. And it is. But it was just, the message was, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. That was it. It wasn't anything like, the more I think about that message, the more profound it is. But it wasn't anything like, oh, you're so cool, and oh, check this out. It was like, and here's this message, bring back it, to the people. There was nothing like that. It was just like, you're ready. I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. And it was, what it highlights to me is just the importance of context. Always. Out of context information is extremely dangerous. It is extremely dangerous to get out of context information in school, as we know now, because tons of people think they're educated and intelligent and wise, and they are not. They have experienced very little meaningful things in the real world. And that's due to the dangers of out of context information. If you take psychedelics and you perceive spirits and machine elves or demons and angels and whatever it is that you see, God, you are going to see something that is likely out of context. There are cultures in the world that use things like ayahuasca and, and other drugs, peyote, things like that, that are part of their theological rituals. There's so much context in those actions that they do. They have an entire culture and tradition and history and stories and families and communities built around everything that is, feeding into this experience. They have heard from every single generation leading up to them and about this experience, and it's usually linked to some type of rite of passage as well that is, a coming of age ceremony sometimes. There's so much context to it that is not just, I took, DMT or I took mushrooms or something like that. And I'm not saying that these things can't have positive effects either. There was studies that have shown mushrooms to have a positive effect on people. I know Johns Hopkins did a study on it many years ago. And I will say I took mushrooms in college a couple times, and that was it. I've not done any drugs in many years, but, and I have not done anything that is a hallucinogen since college. And I will say that I think that it positively impacted my mood going forward pretty much permanently, even though I didn't have like a crazy profound experience. Like, the world looked pretty, but I didn't see God or anything, or machine elves. But I'm grateful that I didn't, because it would have lacked context. I would not have understood at all what I was seeing. It's one thing to see that the clouds look really pretty, but it's another thing to see like machine elves when you're a materialist atheist like I was. It would have probably done a lot of damage. And that is very easy to have happen if you're perceiving things out of context, if you're getting information outside of context. And like I've said here before, it's kind of I don't know how good of an analogy it is, but it's a very different experience to sneak into the White House and try and see what's going on with the president, versus being invited in and sitting down with them and them telling you what's going on, showing you what's going on. you're going to see things outside of context if you are sneaking in there. And that's what psychedelics basically are, outside of context. So if you're not a member of a tribe that traditionally uses ayahuasca in South America, then it's not enough to just do this with a shaman or something like that. I don't think we don't have the traditions and the stories and the social community and the history involved to contextualize that experience. I think that it's very dangerous. It's also a shortcut. You're not, whatever you do gain from it, it's not going to be very relevant probably to your life, and also it kind of will diminish it when it does, if it could actually happen, if you could actually have like a theological experience. That doesn't mean you have to see crazy things either. You don't have to. You can have feeling, and that can happen constantly. But it can also happen in certain profound instances. You can have experiences with the divine that are much better than kind of like a forced, peek beyond the wall to see that there is more to this universe than just the matter that we see. There is a realm of consciousness and things that go on frequencies that are beyond our normal perception. But that it's a dangerous thing to do, and I would definitely caution against it. I've said on here before, I always did want to try DMT because I would listen to these people talk about their DMT experiences, and then I couldn't understand at all what they were talking about. I was like, these people sound insane, but they're all saying the same thing, which means there's something real to this that I don't understand. And I no longer have a desire to try DMT because we have it in our bodies naturally, and I had the sober experience that was enough. But one of the things that I've also noticed is that when people do have these experiences, even if they'll sit there, they'll take DMT, they'll be like, yeah, it's all consciousness. I saw that it was all consciousness, and I saw that there's like these machine elves and or demons or whatever entities, and angels, but then it doesn't change them. It doesn't change how they act. It doesn't change how they want to act. Really, even more importantly, it doesn't change how they want to act. That if you got a glimpse of, if you understood reality on a more fundamental level, it would change how you are, would change your being, would change your desires and your goals, and even your actions eventually. But I see so many people, they'll be like, in every sense of the word, and self-described atheist, they'll take, some hallucinogenic drug, they'll have some crazy experience, they'll be like, yeah, I saw the divine, or I saw that it's all consciousness, we're all connected, there's no boundaries between us, it's all one consciousness, and then they'll go on living their lives exactly the same after that. It's just a fun or cool story, and that means that there's a lot of missing information there. This is a topic that I don't like to bring up very often, especially when it comes to discussing personal experiences, because like I said, you have to treat this with reverence. You have to give some context to it. And that means like I have to tell the whole story or enough of it to give it context. And, if you want to hear more about it, I will talk more about it on other streams. But I had a theophany, and I've talked about it on previous streams, and maybe I'll make a video that's specific to it later this year and goes into the entire story. But it was an amazingly profound experience, and it was sober, and it's only happened once. And I don't think that anybody's goal should be to have the same experience as someone else had. I think everybody can experience the divine in exactly the way that they need to, and that's different for everyone. And it changes probably throughout your life, but you want to try and make sure that it's contextualized, properly, and whatever you gain from it is whatever you see in that, or gain from that, or perceive in that experience, is properly contextualized. It's not a good idea just to want to have a crazy experience. These things are real, as Wolfgang Smith said. I keep wanting to say Wolfgang Puck, but these are real things and they are dangerous. But I think the main danger is out of context information, but also you could potentially be letting things in that you wouldn't want to. But I don't know, exactly what the specifics of that would be like. So, next clip.
So in the vertical ascent, which that's one of the things this image comes from, it talks about the vertical holds primacy, whereas the horizontal operates laboriously, one might say, by way of a temporal progression through space. The fact is that vertical causality derives from wholeness, whereas the horizontal derives from parts. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the difference between wholeness and parts and how that works out across all of not only physics, but across that whole picture of your iconic tripartite cosmos.
Well, first of all, I think we need to realize that physics and modern science in general, by its very modus operandi, its intrinsic methodology, deals incurably with parts. In other words, it can conceive of a whole only as a sum of parts. And so the causality with which physics operates is a causality emanating from the parts. And you can't say acting upon wholes, because physics really has no ontological conception of wholeness. The only wholeness physicists deal with is a sum of parts. So physics is based upon atomization. And it turns out, however, that wholeness does play an absolutely essential role in the economy of life, whether the physicists know about it or not. And along with the idea of wholes, there is a corresponding causality, which I call vertical causality as opposed to horizontal causality. And I first introduced this idea of vertical causality in the context of physics. The new physics came in 1926, quantum theory, and very soon physicists realized that there's something very puzzling about quantum theory, because a quantum system in its own right is a very, very strange, bizarre thing. I mean, for example, if you have a quantum particle, it will not be located in general in any particular point in space. In fact, there's a probability that it is given any two regions in space, there's a certain probability that the particle is in that region. So these quantum particles are very, very strange entities. You can't really conceive of them except in mathematical terms. But what puzzled physicists is that when they make a measurement, in an instant, as it were, this particle, instead of being spread out over vast regions of space, obtains a particular position. The measured particle is in a given place and time. And so this is something that puzzles the physicists. How is it possible for an act of measurement to collapse this probability wave and give a definite position to particles which have no definite positions before the act of measurement? And believe it or not, physicists have been kicking this so-called measurement problem around for a good 100 years, almost, more like 90. For about 90 years they've been speculating on this with no actual solution in sight. The weirdest ideas are presented by them in order to resolve this conundrum, but I believe it's still an open question in the physics world. So this is what got me into thinking about quantum mechanics, and I came to a very simple conclusion. The reason measurement is not comprehensible to the physicist is that the measuring instrument itself is not really a physical thing. It is not the kind of thing that the physicist studies or describes in his equations. It is what I call a corporeal entity. So there is a difference between a corporeal entity and a physical object. And the difference basically is that the corporeal entity is perceptible. If you think of visual perception, it has color, it has qualities, and we perceive it. So I realized that what had happened is that the physicist had abstracted from the perceivable world. The perceivable world is real, it's not an imagination. The red apple is there, and it's red, and we perceive it. But to the physicist, the red apple has become a res cogitans, a thing of the mind. So what happened is that in the 17th century, Western civilization became, as it were, controlled by one philosopher, René Descartes. He introduced a very actually weird philosophy, and it gained traction. It became the philosophy which scientists, and especially, of course, physicists, absorb, as it were, without knowing that it is a philosophy. They think it's just the way it is. And so I realized that the reason that this measurement problem continues to mystify physicists to the present day, and you should see some of the theories they evolved in order to explain it, it becomes really weird. And the reason that the physicist can't resolve that problem is that he has fallen victim to this Cartesian philosophy, and in the Cartesian philosophy, there are no corporeal entities because all qualities are relegated to the mind. So Descartes, as it were, he cut the world into two parts, res extensae, extended entities on one side, and all they are is, they are quantities, they are, so to speak, the world as a physicist conceives of it. That's on the outside, and everything else, everything that's not a res extensa was, as it were, postulated to be a res cogitans, so a thing of the mind, a thing of thought. So René Descartes cut the world into these two pieces, and this has become, so to speak, the underlying philosophy which everybody who goes into physics absorbs unknowingly. And it is really unknowingly because I find that when I try to explain what Alfred North Whitehead then called bifurcation, this cutting of reality into two pieces, the mechanical and quantitative, and the rest is all supposed to be mental. To the physicist, this is not a theory, this is the way things are. And when you try to explain it to him, he doesn't really understand it because he doesn't know any other way of conceiving the world. So what I'm saying is that in Western civilization, the intellectual class has typically been victimized by this Cartesian philosophy. They accept this not as a philosophy, but as simply the way things are. And it's a very tragic thing because, first of all, it makes life tragic. Just think, when a father or mother holds a child, according to Descartes, they're holding a res extensa. All that there is outside in space and time is a mechanism. It's a terribly tragic way of looking at life, and of course, I fully believe that it is false. But the point that I'm making is that the world of science has been duped by this bifurcationist Cartesian philosophy. So they think of the world as greatly reduced. And what I marveled when I began thinking about the so-called measurement problem is this, that as soon as you step out of this Cartesian way of looking at the world, the solution of the measuring problem is very, very simple, childishly simple, because the measuring instrument is corporeal. That means it is perceptible, it owns qualities. You can see it, you can touch it, you can hear it, give sound. Incidentally, if it weren't perceptible, it couldn't measure anything because measurement is a matter of seeing, say, a number on a screen. So what has happened is that our men of science, and especially men of physics, have been duped by a philosophy which is totally imaginary, it is totally off course. And incidentally, the interesting thing is that in essence, this Cartesian philosophy was enunciated long by a pre-Socratic known as Democritus, yes. So Democritus, before Plato, the pre-Socratic, said that people vulgarly think there's the sweet and the bitter, in other words, there's a perceptible, but in reality only atoms and the void. So this is the philosophy which the Platonist and Aristotelian...
Okay, so That was a long clip, but it was very important. Lots to unpack. So I totally agree with what he's basically trying to say, and I'll say why I say he's trying to say it, because I don't. You have to propose a framework in order to deal with the problem that he's identified. You have to propose an alternative framework that makes sense. You can't just say this is a problem. That is part of it, but like the next step is to propose an alternative framework that does make sense, or else you can't actually truly make sense or describe how things would make sense to others, even if you can kind of visualize it in your own mind. So what he's saying is that Descartes proposed this philosophy that the world is divided into that which is perceived and that which is imagined, essentially. That which is in your head and basically your thoughts and matter. The problem with this is that because we're inside of the mind of God, and we are minds inside the mind of God, and we are composed of minds, that's what a cell is, it's a little mind, which are composed themselves by little minds that are, molecules, and those are composed themselves by little minds, which are atoms in sentient singularity theory. Basically, there is no dividing of the physical from the mental. You cannot actually separate them. What it is that we perceive the thoughts of the being that is higher in the hierarchy than us, God, or the cosmos, creation, you could say, Christ, if you're a Christian. Creation is the sun. It is the initial replicative consciousness. It is the mind that is the universe that is created, that is the logos but is created, and by the initial mind. And so all there is minds, and so there is no separation between matter and mind in reality. It's just a matter of perception. We see the thoughts of God as concrete reality. Our thoughts are superseded by his thoughts. Any being above us is what we're going to see the thoughts of as constraints of us. So our thoughts are constraints of ourselves. That is something that I think one day we will really understand, but it might be decades. But I've talked about on here before where, I had an experience once where I thought myself into manifesting a rash on my body once. Like, I didn't try to, but I was like focused on something that was just a mark, and then I focused on it, and I started thinking, investigating, researching, and I basically convinced myself that I had every STD known to man. I didn't have any STDs, by the way. And when I went into the doctor to get tested, they laughed at me. And they were like, that's nothing. They were like, literally, you probably manifested that. Now that we're going to tell you to relax, you're going to leave and it's going to go away basically immediately. I manifested physical symptoms, guys. I was peeing like every 10 minutes. I was having pain while I was peeing. I had a visible rash that anyone could see. But they told me, they were like, all your symptoms are real, but they're going to go away as soon as you relax. And as soon as I left, every single symptom was gone. I was tested. I had nothing. And that is, my thoughts became the constraint, and they created they made my cells act a certain way. It was incredible. And I don't know what the limit to that is, but the doctors knew that this was going to happen because they had seen it again and again and again. But I manifested every symptom of what I was expecting this to be, which I had no idea what it was expecting, other than I literally convinced myself I had every STD and had none. And there was no reason for me to have them either. I just, when you start Googling, health concerns, it's going to lead you to paranoia. And that's what happened. And it's hilarious in hindsight, but it was not funny at the time. But it was to them because they knew that this was not anything at all. And as soon as I left, the symptoms went away. And that means that my thoughts created physical constraints for my cells. It's amazing. And, that is my thoughts created physical constraints for my cells. It's amazing. And, 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 it's amazing. So but you can prove this right now. I can show you how you do this every second of every day. If I go to pick up this water bottle, every cell in my arm now has to get to work and move a certain way, and they are constrained in a certain way by even the fact that my arm is moving, by the fact that my blood is pumping to muscles that allow me to pick up the water bottle. I have created constraints, physical constraints for the world my cells live in by moving. Okay? So not only do my thoughts influence the way my cells act and maneuver, my actions always do. Always do. You create physical constraints for your cells every time you pick something up, every time you blink, every time you eat, every time you fast, every time you sleep, every time like when you sleep, you're basically like letting your cells off the clock for the day, and they get to go home and they get to clean their apartment and they get to, take care of themselves and eat and be with their friends and family. And I'm being like completely serious. And they get to recharge. But during the day, they're at work. They have to do what the boss tells them, and you're the boss. You're creating physical constraints for them, though, as the boss. You're not just telling them what to do. You're literally changing their world to make it so that they have to do certain things. And this division that he's talking about, Wolfgang is talking about regarding Descartes, where he's like divides the world into thoughts and matter, basically, if I'm understanding correctly, it doesn't work. The matter that we see is what matters because it is the thoughts of the mind that we are constrained within, that is above us in the hierarchy. And so you need a different way of dividing the world, and in order to start categorizing things and making sense of it. Because there has to be some way of looking at the world and divvying it up in a way that allows you to orient properly. And the way to do this, according to sentient singularity theory, is into two parts as well, to start at least, and that is things and beings. There are things, like a water bottle, that are perceived by beings like us. But they're not a being. And they don't exist outside the perceptions of beings. Beings are what I believe he's calling corporeal entities. Let me Google that. So corporeal, I can't say it. Corporeal, relating to a person's body, especially as opposed to their spirit. So he's saying that this would be a corporeal entity, or having a body is... See, but this in and of itself isn't the right way to talk about this, because every being has a body. But it's really, the body is your perception of of the dimensions of interaction that your mind is orienting within and navigating. So it's not trying to divide things up into body and mind, or mind and matter, which I said mind and matter, but he's saying body and mind. I guess that's not correct either, because there is no distinction between mind and body. As I've said on here before, every single stream, before the stream, I clean my desk and I try and organize my room in here a little bit, because it literally organizes your mind. Your mind is not your brain. You have a brain. You are a mind. And your mind is the constraints and degrees of freedom of your mind are influenced by the environment that you are perceiving, which is also part of your mind. And so in cleaning your desk and organizing your desk, you are organizing your mind. And, when Jordan Peterson says, clean your room, bucko, like, do it. Like, it does, it organizes your beingness. This is what allowing your cell, going to sleep allows your cells to do. It allows them to, like, organize themselves. That's why healing happens at night when you're sleeping a lot. Because they can't focus on healing when you're focusing on grabbing things. your cells are all focused on, okay, we all need to move together to make sure that we can pick up the water bottle. They're not being like, okay, everybody go do their own thing and take care of, clean your house, which is like healing. And, but this is why you need to divide the world into things and beings, though. Because beings, now that beings are fundamental, they are in sentient singularity theory, this allows you to start focusing on hierarchy that allows for you to understand why we perceive things. So there's an issue when people say things like everything's an illusion, or like this is just a virtual reality. It's not exactly that. That's a helpful metaphor, but it has its limits, and it's in how well it allows you to understand the world. Because then all of a sudden you're like, okay, does the water bottle exist beyond my perception? It's like, the thing is no, it doesn't. But the molecules and atoms do. And the problem is that if you can't exist without molecules and atoms existing, because you're built on them. So there's a logical breakdown that happens when you say that molecules and atoms are just a perception of reality. Like a water bottle. A water bottle is too, just a perception of it's an illusion. It's like a virtual reality. But then you're a virtual reality. Like everything starts breaking down. Where's your beingness then? And it just doesn't work. Trying to separate spirit from body is not very logical, even ultimately. It's helpful in certain instances, but it's not. It has its limits because it's not ultimately fundamentally true. You are a mind, and you are a sentient being, and there are other sentient beings in a hierarchical chain of causality, which is a lineage chain. A lineage is a chain of causality. That's, I exist because my parents existed, and they took certain steps to make me exist, and their parents existed. They existed because their parents existed, and they took certain, actions that allowed for them to exist. So there is this chain, this lineage chain of causality that is responsible for us being here. You break that when you start just saying that even atoms are just a perception the same as a water bottle. They're not. But this is why it's tough to solve this problem, because you have to solve simultaneous issues in this field of fundamentality. You have to solve the lineage problem of causality. You have to solve the hierarchical problem, and you also have to solve the being versus animate versus inanimate, problem, I guess you could say. And you can do that, but you have to reframe everything and build it all at once. You can't just fix one part of our scientific understanding currently and then have everything make sense. You need to basically go back to the basics on them all. It's very tough, and that's it's tough to do that, have that simultaneous change across multiple entangled points of view and assumptions and axioms that we have, and that's why it's not really done. Because it's one thing for one scientist to come along and say, okay, we're wrong about this, and here's why, and here's a way that makes more sense, to look at it this way. But if we're going to actually make progress toward the next level of understanding of our cosmos and of our of existence and of ourselves, then you have to basically say our perspectives here are all wrong simultaneously, and we have to basically change all of them, like I said, simultaneously in order to solve this issue. But it also has to be consistent with observation, which there's plenty of observations. It's not like you're saying atoms don't exist. It's like, but it is a fundamental reframing to say atoms are sentient beings and not like a water bottle. There's something fundamentally different. And, but this, I see what he's trying to describe here, I think, but I don't think it's very easy to understand in the way that he's describing it, because, like I said, there is no real distinction between mind and body, and information and matter, or mind, thoughts and matter. Thoughts, matter are thoughts in the mind of the being above you, and there is no separation between mind and body. So it's just helpful to perceive it that way in certain instances, but it's not really there in the physical sense. It is in a kind of like if you're starting to look at, you have two souls in Judaism, or in Christianity they say humans have original sin and they have the Holy Spirit, and in Judaism they say you have the animal soul and the godly soul, and you can understand yourself when you divide it like that, but because you're dividing will in a way, but you're not dividing body. There is no difference between body and spirit that's clear cut. It just doesn't exist. It's a matter of perspective, and that's why it's so difficult, though, to explain this problem. But if you're going to actually explain it, then it's better to just say, no, we need to divide the world into two parts, or to two perceptions, beings and things. And things are dependent and defined by beings. Beings are fundamental, not things. Things come from beings. Beings do not come from things. Okay? So if somebody says, well, yeah, you come from atoms, so you come from things. No, atoms are beings. At least they are hypothesized to be in sentient singularity theory, or they're assumed to be. But, and I think there's plenty of evidence for that I have. And like I said, new video, now that we have the technological ability to do it, there will be videos coming out that are not live, that are succinct and explanatory of a lot of these concepts much more coherently than I can usually do on a live stream. But you can only beings can only come from beings. They do not come from things. Things can only come from the perceptions of beings. They cannot exist otherwise. Any other framework breaks down logically. So this is my proposal for solving this problem. There are beings, there are things. Beings are fundamental to things. And that's it. Things are defined, and we'll get into this later, by beings according to goals. But let's check the chat. Like I said, please hit the like button if you are finding this interesting. And if you're not finding this interesting and you're finding it boring, let me know in a comment and then leave. But if you have any questions, please let me know in the live chat. But good evening, trusted source, Babylonian esoteric knowledge. I don't like the word esoteric. I have a video on my channel, on this channel, about it. It says don't say the E word or something like that. I don't think it helps us understand anything. But I'm not saying you're wrong in what you're thinking. I'm just saying that that way of describing whatever it is that you're trying to describe is not helpful. But thank you for the comment. This was my idea. I had it while on shrooms, and you stole it. I didn't steal your idea, but I don't know what idea you were talking about, because I know that was a comment from a while back. But we trip out on DMT every time we sleep. Yeah, but it's more than that, I think. We don't... I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but yeah, basically, if you're looking at things in a materialistic kind of way, then yes, DMT is in your mind, and I think it is kind of responsible in some way for adjusting the frequency of your perception. It's like the knob on the radio in your car, and it can be turned up, and you can listen to 106.3, and it's Hispanic music, or it can be turned down, and you're listening to classical music or hip hop or something on 98.6 or 95.1 or whatever. But I think that DMT kind of has that kind of function It's the knob, in a way, that controls our perception. So next clip. But not yet. Next clip. So, but he's talking about the measurement problem as well. In that there was so much that he said on that long clip. But the measurement problem, I love that he addresses the measurement problem a lot, because this, I hate that it is even called the measurement problem. It's not a problem. What he says is the issue is that it's what is making the measurement. I think what he's saying, and this, if he is saying that this, then this is correct, is that it's a being that is the measurement taker. It's not a device. Okay, that's not a being. Once Sabine Hossenfelder, she said on a stream that I did a commentary on, she said that the measurement problem, regarding measurement problem, we don't need conscious being to make a measurement, because we know that you can just have a device do it. The level of the lack of effort that has been put into that statement or that response is pretty lacking. There is no device without a conscious being to make the device, to aim the device, to interpret the information that is captured by the device, to perceive that information that is captured by the device. There is no information, because there's no one to be informed, even by a device. Every possible logical examination of this statement breaks down almost immediately once you start, trying to steelman it, and it does not work. It's a being that is making an observation when they are perceiving these particles, these subatomic particles. It's so simple when you understand what is actually happening. It's a wave that you are perceiving a point on, okay? And that's it. And if you try and take this, try and tell me the speed and position of a wave at the exact same time, you can't. Because to tell me its position is to tell me it when it's not, to give me a location, which means like it's not dynamic and moving. It's static, it's fixed. And to perceive its, its velocity or its direction, then you cannot tell me its position, because that would be to fix it, and you need to look at it while it's being perceive its dynamicness, its movingness, the fact that it's moving, in order to tell me its direction or its velocity. And this is what's happening with subatomic particles. They're points, they're focus points, or they are perception points of waves. And that's it. I mean, it is so incredibly simple, but it involves assuming that consciousness is the fundamental, and also getting rid of the idea that probability has anything to do with this other than interpretation of or predictive models that we make. That's all probability has to do with. There is no probability involved in the measurement problem fundamentally. It's just, when people say, the electrons orbit the nucleus, and then somebody says, no, they don't actually orbit the nucleus. They exist in a cloud of, of probabilistic, of probability. And it's like, no, you're perceiving a wave, basically like a ripple coming from a point of information, and that is being perceived, and that wave is moving. So you can, when you look at it, you're only going to see a point. Like, this is due to the constraint of focus of a mind, is that focus implies only focusing on one thing. Like, otherwise it's not focus. And but this, and the idea that they exist in this probabilistic state implies that probability is somehow fundamental to the state that they exist in, but that's not true. If you understood the dimensions of interaction between the two beings that are causing two strings of information to be crossed, basically causing an excitation of a string, which is a fiber on a fiber bundle, which is a mind, that causes a point to be perceived, which we call a particle, fundamental particle, then you would know that it's purely deterministic. Choice is included in how these things are determined, but it is deterministic. It is not probabilistic. Probability is a tool. It's not. It doesn't fundamentally exist. It's just a tool. And I was quite good at probability in school, and I'm telling you, it's not a part of fundamental reality. It's part of our modeling of reality. It's part of our prediction about things, but it's not about the actuality of things. If that makes sense, let me know in the chat. But there is no measurement problem. But in order to realize this, you need to cast out multiple assumptions at the same time. That's what I'm saying is like why we can't solve these problems is because you need to say, okay, I'm not going to just assume that one thing is wrong and that maybe you're proposing something better. I have to assume that and that are all wrong. And that in our understanding of them at least, even if they are perceptually true, they are fundamentally wrong we are fundamentally wrong in our interpretation or in our understanding. Good luck getting the scientific community to do that beyond until you can prove it, experimentally, or that your perspective is more complete. But they say, in this clip as well, they're talking about artificial life and how scientists are trying to create artificial
analogy
life,
of the
and you just can't.
And their abstraction process, right, versus a biologist who's going to literally, kill something and try to analyze its parts and figure out how to put the parts back together and make it alive again. And it's not possible, right? And in science today, you hear all kinds of conversation about emergence, right, and emergent properties, right? Like artificial intelligence. And I worked in artificial intelligence for years. This was part of what my PhD was in. And I studied at the Santa Fe Institute. I studied complexity science. I was involved in the field of so-called artificial life. How do we create the right, algorithms and conditions in a computer with metabolic tax and growth and reproduction and look for emergent properties, right? And in this whole thesis today in the world about artificial intelligence and technology, that where this is an emergent intelligence, is all coming out of this philosophy that says, let's get rid of the most important things, go down to this level of abstraction, and then try to recreate all the most important things. And that is what we fundamentally reject. And that's this idea of wholeness and parts, which is what you originally asked about, and vertical causation, right? It's actually consciousness and life and corporeality that affects the lower realms. And it's not the other way around. You cannot abstract and reduce your way back to creation and to life.
Amen. You cannot do that. And they've never shown anything that gives any kind of indication that would be the case. And yet it is still assumed. And I think that there's multiple reasons why that is the case. And that's why it's so hard to break out of this, because there are multiple causes that are feeding into this perspective as becoming the dominant narrative in academia and science. This anti-theistic, materialist, perspective, random perspective. It's funny when Wolfgang Smith said that I always expect him to have a more sophisticated last name than Smith, so I always forget his last name, which is funny. But given Wolfgang, it's like Smith. But he stated that physicists just come up with the craziest theories to kind of explain and deal with these issues that keep arising in this perspective that is, the dominant perspective in science. And they totally do. I mean, Sean Carroll's Many Worlds is insane. And I don't know if it's just Sean Carroll. I know that it's not. But he is one of the people who pushed this theory in the physics world today, and he's a very prominent voice, very good teacher, very wrong about the fundamental nature of the universe, but that's a dangerous combination. But his whole, the theory that he pushes, I know it's not just his, but of many worlds, that there's just all these different universes, that's why we just happen to exist in the one that has life in it and has things the way that it the way that they are, that allows for consciousness to exist. It's just nonsense. There's nothing backing that whatsoever, other than just probabilities. But the thing is that probability isn't fundamental. So you can't rely on probability as your axiom on a fundamental theory. You just can't. And so again, there's just so many issues with this that arise. But that's just one of them. But there's countless. But this has implications on us and our well-being. It's not just, this detached information. People talk about quantum physics, and in some ways we kind of just assume, the public just assumes it is the epitome of understanding of the world. When people say things like, you're actually a vibrating string dancing in an 11-dimensional hyperspace, and string theory is the God equation. It's people listen and they're like, oh wow, like the cat is dead and alive at the same time. That's amazing. The wave and particle collapse into this according to this wave function. It's just, I'm not saying that these things can't be perceived, but some of them can, some of them can't. But it's turned into an idol that nobody understands. Nobody understands it. And it also isn't consistent. At the same time, though, it's something that's like super detached from us. If I tell you the cat is dead and alive at the same time, if it's in a box, and you're like, oh wow, that blows my mind. You don't get it. Nobody gets it because it doesn't make sense. And then and neither does the wave and particle collapse thing. It as a true, in the way that it is described, it doesn't make sense. But this is also, even though it's thought of, it's kind of this idol of you have the ultimate understanding, and if you're a quantum physicist, then we can ask you questions about consciousness, even though it has nothing to do with consciousness, according to quantum physicists, and we can ask you questions about politics and everything because you just have the ultimate understanding. At the same time, none of this stuff seems to impact us in our life. If I tell you that a cat in a box is dead and alive at the same time, it doesn't change how we can act at all. If I tell you about particle wave collapses, it doesn't impact us. It doesn't make us think about ourselves differently in any kind of meaningful way. It doesn't change how we live our lives. The ultimate understanding of reality would definitely make you understand the world in a way that was enough to make you change your life, to orient yourself in certain ways, to try to set new and different goals than you would otherwise have. And so we, in one sense, we see quantum physics as the ultimate. In this other sense, we see it as completely useless and detached from us. And that's because there's multiple things that are feeding into this perspective that are wrong. That's why you're having this weird superposition of nonsense. But he says this is Wolfgang talking about this. Let me know in the chat if the notice I just can pause the video. It's amazing. It doesn't, I don't hit pause, it doesn't pause, then I hit pause again, then it does pause and then it unpauses. That is not happening anymore. But let me know in the chat how the quality of the stream is, and just so I'm aware of how the new equipment is working. But here is the next clip.
And this, of course, has had a tremendous cultural impact upon the contemporary Western civilization, because the dominant force in contemporary Western civilization is science, and the basic science is physics. So the fact is that modern Western culture has, as it were, eliminated all the higher levels of being, and we've become sort of creatures of the mud. We're crawling around on the earth thinking that's all there is. So the blessed thing about modern physics is that nobody really believes it. I'm sure that no parent, when it holds its child, thinks that it's holding a bunch of molecules. Not even the physicists go that far. But yet, in a sense, that would be the logical consequence. So the reason we founded this foundation, Philosophia Initiative Foundation, is because we recognize that this reductionism of contemporary science is not only wrong, but it is dangerous. It is destructive of all higher culture. It really shows the resilience of mankind that it has been able to withstand that absolutely poisonous philosophy coming in the name of science, and still retain its humanity with all the limitations that we see daily. We're still human beings, and that's a marvel, because if we would fully believe what quote-unquote science tells us these days, we would be ipso facto dehumanized.
This is his Philosophia initiative. Maybe we will, get more into this stuff at a certain point. And now that we have, upgraded tech, I will be seeking to do some interviews with some of the people that we have, whose ideas we have discussed on this channel. One of them, hopefully, being Wolfgang Smith. But, his Philosophia initiative, I will link it in the description below. I do have a link to their full discussion on the Meaning Code YouTube channel below, and if you click on that in the description of that video, you will see a link to the Philosophia initiative. But I very much agree with what he's saying here, but I also think that there's more to it, and we don't. But when he says we don't believe what physics tells us, because we still feel things that physics has not explained, or that is contrary to what is the narrative in physics, which is that there's something beautiful about, even physicists, they'll say, oh, I'm guided by beauty all the time. And, it's like, okay, so there's beauty is fundamental here. Like your quest for a fundamental theory is that basically it is assuming as its axiom, or it is presupposing beauty, the existence of beauty. Yet it's not presupposing the existence of consciousness. Explain that to me, because you can't. But that's just a ridiculous. The more you think about that, the just more ridiculous it gets. But it is dangerous, though, and you can see, though, that we are losing our humanity. He says it's amazing that we've retained it. I don't think that the people who have truly assumed the opposite of what, or who have assumed kind of the fundamental narratives of what is taught in science and extrapolated from those fundamental narratives, I don't think that they have really retained their humanity. I think they're losing it. You see that stuff with a lack of meaning, feeling meaning in the world. There's the meaning crisis that everybody talks about constantly, and we for how hard life was in the past, nobody talked about meaning crises like 2,000 years ago the way that they do now, or even 200 years ago the way that they do now. People knew that they were mattered to others in a way that we just are losing sight of today. And we're losing sight of our fundamental constraints, and we are assuming that they don't exist, even though they are part of our fundamental being and our experience, like gender. And we'll get more into that eventually, but gender is a fundamental component of reality, and it is intrinsic to our realization and manifestation and execution of our meaning. And it's not being explained well, and there's lots of reasons why our language with it is totally off on all sides of that discussion too. So nobody's got it right in the modern discussion. I'm not advocating for exactly one side over the other, but I will say that we are losing our connection to anything as an assumption of truth. And people, like I've said on here before, I've had philosophy PhD students come into my Discord and try and argue with me for hours that their thesis is correct, and their thesis is that consciousness doesn't exist and it's an illusion. To who? Who is an illusion as a perception? So who is perceiving? Like they're literally writing this into their thesis, but who's writing this into their thesis? It's like all I have to do is ask them, who's writing this? This thesis? It's like, I am. Oh, you are. I am. You can't navigate the world without presupposing certain fundamental truths. You can't navigate your interaction with people without presupposing certain fundamental truths. Consciousness, gender, beauty, a meaning, like responsibility, like these morality, like these things, hierarchy. Like you can't navigate the world. You can't navigate yourself without assuming fundamental truths to exist if they are fundamentally true. If you reject them, you're going to lose your humanity. You're going to end up a cog in the system, lacking any responsibility, gender, meaning, and beauty. I mean, you're going to just become a tool of the corporations. I mean, it is happening. It's very, very concerning. And it is because we have broken from true structures, our connection to true structures, and they are no longer fundamental assumptions, within academia especially, but by people who are, increasingly constrained by academia. And, you need to perceive your own and feel your own constraints and abilities in the world. And if you're sitting in a classroom all day, then what are you going to check? What firsthand experience are you going to check against that secondhand information that ends up being totally wrong? If you're going to, it's like if I tell you that boiling water is cold, you don't know that I'm lying until you burn yourself. And you need to be allowed to burn yourself. But the problem is that in our schools, when we're outsourcing our parenting, we are causing an issue where the avoidance of having, responsibility or where liability is ruling or what is allowed and what is, permitted in, and then what is experienced in that state. And Wolfgang goes into that kind of in this next clip, but he says, well, it's not the next clip, but we will in a future clip. This is him he's talking about in this next clip, he's talking about intelligent design is a dangerous thing. And I don't think that it's amazing I can just hit pause. I'm just saying, I don't know. I have had viewers tell me that it is incredibly frustrating to watch me struggle with getting the video to pause and unpause when I wanted to. And I'm telling you, it is incredibly frustrating on this side too. And to not have that, guys, we haven't even started making new videos and 3D renders or anything yet. It's just, I can pause when I need to. Very nice. Okay. This next clip, though, is on intelligent design. He's saying is actually dangerous to assume, and he's going to get into it. We'll try and talk about it a bit. I kind of think I see what he's saying.
Is saying something about vertical causation, and that we believe that there is a designer and that all of this beauty and complexity comes from someplace outside of us. But at the same time, it also kind of puts us back squarely into the realm of the physicist again if we rely on intelligent design. So if you might want to say something about that. Well, in chapter 9, I think, of Ancient Wisdom.
I think Wolfgang, what Karen is speaking to is kind of the Dembski theorem versus the generalized Dembski theorem, right? And how the Dembski theorem, as it is presented, focuses, on mathematics and on information theory, and it kind of reduces everything to the level of information theory, whereas clearly that's not what your philosophy would say.
Well, if I could just quote here, he says the intelligent design movement threatens to plunge us into an error worse than Darwinism. Whereas design theory has de facto disqualified the Darwinian mechanism, it has in no way discredited the Darwinist concept of common descent, which thus remains entrenched as a scientist's dogma. And common descent obviates metaphysics in a domain which happens to be incurably metaphysical. I just thought it was a marvelous argument, and maybe it's too complex to get into here, but he says it only compounds bad science with heretical theology. For authentic evolution is indeed an unfolding. Wherever there's an outside, there also has to be an inside. And the picture that you gave is, we could think of the center of that icon as being everything. And then as it unfolds out, it becomes the circle. What's unfolding out are all those infinite axes, all folded into that center that can then unfold. Because we tend to see only the outside and not the inside, but an inside must always precede an outside.
Yeah, you raise very interesting questions here. First of all, let me say that I was very happy when Bill Dembski's book came out in 1998. I had written my book, The Quantum Enigma, in 1995. And in 1995, when I wrote The Quantum Enigma, I showed that the measurement problem cannot be resolved on the basis of horizontal causality, the causality known to the physicists, that in order to, quote-unquote, collapse a wave function, you need a different kind of causality, which I call vertical, and which acts instantaneously. So this is what happened in 1995. In 1998, when Bill Dembski came out with his book, it turns out that he rediscovered what I call vertical causality from an information theoretic point of view, and he...
Okay, first of all, just to try and make this make a bit more sense. I mean, this might not be the right time to say this, but when he says that collapsing the wave function can only happen not horizontally, but vertically, and that it, what did he say? He said it can only happen when causality is happening instantaneously. I think he said something like that. But really what it is that on the realm of causality, on the level of like God, because God exists outside of space-time, he is space. He maneuvers in time. He can't maneuver in space, so he maneuvers through the connecting of assembly time, basically, which is like entanglement relationships. He's managing entanglement relationships, and they are built on previous ones. So you have to know the possibilities and have a goal when setting up the previous ones as the with the end. This is one of the arguments for scriptures being divine, is that it appears when you really examine them that they were written. It was like whoever wrote the beginning knew the end. Whoever knew the end, who wrote the end, it was like it was written simultaneously. And I do see that even in the math in scripture, which is just incredible. But it's not from our perspective, because we're inside of creation. We don't see things instantaneously. What we see is simultaneously. So causation happens, yes, from God's perspective. And from our perspective as well, it's probably better to say causation is happening simultaneously, not rather than instantaneously, which is both in contrast to what is the opposing viewpoint that he's giving. But because the collapsing of a wave function into the perception of a particle or a point is an interaction between two strings of information, that forms matter, which means like there's information coming from above and being perceived below, and also you have a hand in the manipulation of that as well. It means that we're acting and the universe is acting, or we're acting and God is acting, or like our cell is acting and we are acting simultaneously. We can do what our cells allow, and our cells must do what we, kind of allow them to do in our according to our goals and things like that as well. So this is a simultaneous causal. It's this simultaneous causality because there's two interacting entities at minimum, and it's that they're interacting and they're experiencing moment simultaneously, and that is causing the collapse of a wave function. I hope that made some sense, but we'll get more into it in future produced videos, but we'll listen to what he has to say here.
Proved that you cannot produce complex specified information by means of the causality known to the physicists, by means of what I call horizontal causality. So in that sense, Dembski's work is a partial verification of what I said 3 years earlier in the quantum enigma. But now, getting back to the intelligent design movement, which came out of that rediscovery of vertical...
Entanglement happens on the level of simultaneity or instantaneousness. That's why quantum entanglement can be observed by, when you flip the charge of a particle, it instantly simultaneously shifts, a particle that would even be on the other side of the universe. Like, people say that at least. And that's because entanglement happens outside of space-time. And it's a simultaneous or instantaneous causal construct or relationship.
I have problems with it because instead of denying the idea of evolution, which is upside down, evolution says things come from the circumference of the circle, and all the world's great philosophy and theology says just the opposite. Things come from the center. So there is this inversion, and instead of correcting that inversion, they simply say, yes, evolution is a fact, but it requires a different kind of causality. And so this is unfortunate. They missed a great opportunity to help straighten out our civilization. They're not doing that. But it is a partial verification of what I arrived at in completely different ways. And then I should say one thing further. A few years later, quite a few years later, in fact, it was about 3 years ago, I discovered that Dembski's theorem, which is closed in the language of information theory, is just a very, very special case of something incomparably more general, and it is very, very simple. The idea of vertical causation is, as it were, paired with another ontologic idea, and that is the idea of an irreducible wholeness. And once you have these two ideas together, vertical causation, irreducible wholeness, you can intellectually prove a number of very basic, I call them axioms, call them facts. And one of these ontological facts is this, that you cannot, it takes vertical causation to produce irreducible wholeness. So the horizontal causation, the causation known to physics, cannot produce irreducible wholeness. And so Bill Dembski's theorem is just a very, very special case of this basic ontological theorem. And
okay, so what is he saying? This is great. This is great. What he's saying is something that's very much part of sentient singularity theory as well. He's saying that there is this irreducible wholeness about existence, about, beings in existence, is what I'm guessing he's stating. Consciousness has an irreducible wholeness to it. You are you. I think this is related to prime numbers. Prime numbers are divisible by one and themselves, and that's it. Like, I think prime numbers have a fundamental relationship with consciousness, but I don't have an ability to prove that yet. But or explain exactly how that is. But another time we'll try and get into it. But this, if you read, you go to sentientsingularity.com. The website has been updated, by the way. to work better, depending on the dimensions of the screen and stuff. There's no more video here because I just couldn't get that to work. But if you go to writings and you go to the technical description of existence, you can see that sentient singularity theory describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. Sentience is the phenomenon of feeling, sensations, and emotions. Singularity is defined as something that is one distinct unit or something that is especially unique. Sentient singularity theory also denotes a singularity as a structure that has the property of infinite oneness, such as a Mobius strip, or one being that is composed of many beings, such as a multicellular organism. Sentient singularity theory can therefore be understood that everything that exists is part of a single universal sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. These additional singularities of sentience or self-aware beings are arranged into a nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked holonic structures. This pattern forms a single self-reflective knot of perception heading an assembly body that integrates multiple entangled strings of information. Okay. And then this is a poetic description. It says, beyond the beginning, sentience exists. Existence is sentient, and sentience is one. The sentient one is sovereign and eternal and alone and wills to create another. It divides, their singular beingness to multiply and manifest meaning. And so, and you can see in here, it just says, it just says one a lot. The active one, the reactive one, the two judge each other, the two decay, the two hate, the two perceive, the two forgive, the two merge. Which two is just two ones, it's not, it's not separate from ones. So there are distinct units of the universe and that are irreducible. Those units or those parts are holonic structures, which are, if you look up a holon in philosophy, philosophy. A holon is something that is simultaneously a whole in and of itself as well as part of a larger whole. Holons are understood as the constituent part wholes of a hierarchy. Okay, this is exactly sentient singularity theory. It's just more comprehensive in sentient singularity theory. But as to how that unfolds, but it's unfolding. This partitioning of reality happens through this folding process, this reflective process of, one perceiving inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and that is how, a being is able to self-reflect on itself and therefore be a whole. And so this is what he's saying, though, is that there are these indivisible parts of reality, really. I mean, yes, you are divisible in that you are made of many cells, but your body is made of many cells, but you are really not. You are you, and that's it. This cell is it and itself, and that's it. It's not. You can't really take into account the molecules in it, or you can't take into account the cells in me. I am one, and the cell is one. But whereas, you can do that with a bicycle. You can start cutting it up and it's, but you can't really do that with a being. And, but you have to have that. And you also can't have, and this is what I think they're saying, is that this narrative of intelligent design where basically there is no common lineage to all beings. Because philosophically, metaphysically, beings can only come from beings. They cannot come from things, which is true according to sentient singularity theory as well. If you read that poetic description of existence or that, technical description of existence on my webpage, both of these show the exact same message, which is that beings come from beings. These indivisible holons come from other holons. You cannot get a being from non-being. And, but that is consistent, though, with the narrative of a common ancestor. Okay? And that is inconsistent with the dogmatic narrative that is often thought of as intelligent design, where there isn't a common ancestor. But there is a common ancestor. That common ancestor is the prime sentience of existence, and it is God. We all come from God, and there is a nested hierarchical lineage structure that is responsible for unfolding the multiplicity of sentience, these indivisible whole sentient beings that fundamentally make up reality. So there isn't an issue with God created the universe, because that's true. But there is an issue with the idea that God created a universe in which there is no common ancestor of sentient beings. In fact, Darwinian evolution takes it so far back as, we all came from a single cell at some point. Sentient singularity theory says that's correct. But more than that, not only do we come from a shared cell at some point, we came from a shared atom. We came from a shared molecule. We have a lineage that is responsible for growing the tree of life, and that goes further back than cells. Life did not start at cells. Life, as defined as sentient beings, have always existed. There has never been a beginning of life. There's a beginning of multiplicity of sentience, but there's no beginning of sentience where there was no sentience prior. There's always been sentience. It's a logical inevitability for so many reasons that we cannot get into on the stream. But he's right in, I think, what he's saying. And, I didn't read his book, so I don't know for sure if I'm completely correct. So I apologize to everyone in the stream that I'm giving my commentary on if I'm misinterpreting anything. And that goes for any future streams or past streams that I've done. But I believe I understand what he's saying, which is that you can't throw out the idea that we have a common ancestor. Because if you do, you're going to destroy the logic of the system. But at the same time, you must not take the dogma of Darwinism that sentience or consciousness evolved from unconsciousness. You have to take the idea that consciousness can only come from consciousness, from creationism, or theism, creationism, intelligent design, whatever you want to call it. I would say creationism is a better term for it. And then you also have to take the idea of a common ancestor from Darwinism, and you actually have to extend both of them and double down on both ideas simultaneously. And here's another reason why we're having issues, is because, these are seen as two sides of two opposing ideas, when in reality there are certain aspects of the dogma of these that gets lumped into the label that is attributed to these ideas, and that's wrong on both sides. So we can't be like, this side is right and this side is wrong, because they're both right and wrong. We have to deconstruct them completely and start again from first principles. And you can't it's very hard for one person to do that, let alone, it to become an institutionally accepted, direction. He talks a lot about Darwinism and how incomplete it is and how much science clings to it. And I will tell you, as somebody who breeds snakes and geckos and goes and studies with zoologists and biologists, the top herpetologists and zoologists and biologists in the world I've studied under and gone into the field with and worked in, with captive animals with, I have a very good understanding of the hereditary nature of traits and of, natural selection and selective pressures and also, selective breeding. I'm working on making white snakes from non-white snakes, but because I understand heritability and recessive genes and Punnett squares, and I get all that. And but there are also aspects of how things evolve in the animal kingdom alone, and the plants, and if you really wanted to think harder about it, molecules and atoms as well, that are beyond just explainable through selective pressures in a constrained moment. They can only be explained by kind of a simultaneous intentionality to the existence of certain features. So, they'll explain eyes as this way, and they evolved because there was just some cells that were just sensitive to light. It's like, you really dive into the logic of that, and even if that's true, it's not fully explanatory. Here. I'm trying to go fast. Next clip.
The civilization we seem to have
is this next clip is on good and evil.
Pray to counter religion. Something like
one of the big problems with ideology of any kind is, and there's another thinker in this corner of the internet named John Vervaeke. He talks about things being reciprocally narrowing, and an ideology is like that. The more complete and tight that the ideology becomes, the more that it narrows your focus, and then your focus just gets more and more narrow until all you're left with is this tiny little world that you inhabit because your ideology is so tight around you. And that can happen with political ideologies. It can also happen with scientific ideologies, right?
definitely.
But it's also important to acknowledge what Wolfgang is saying here, that there is good and evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there are, and these aren't just, this isn't just a couple of ideologies, right? Like reducing the conversation to ideology is, again, kind of another crutch, if you will, to not have to really wrestle with the tough questions that we all have to ask ourselves and face today culturally, right? Which is this kind of reduction of everything, to a relativism and a reductionism, and kind of an avoidance of, well, hey, if there is a God, right, what does that mean? And
well, wouldn't you say though that the evil is not something out there? It's not some entity. Well, okay, let me verify that a little bit. But the evil resides in me just as much as it resides out there. I mean, I'm just as capable of evil as anybody is capable of evil. And then there is an entity who's obviously trying to drive us all towards more and more evil. So I think that sometimes we want to say, well, there's this idea out there, and that idea is evil, when a lot of it is our own desire to believe something that's going to take us down a direction that we want to go. And I think that happens in scientism is that our desires can guide us along a path that leads us in the evil way, but it's because our evil desires are also connected up with that. It's not like it's just that thing out there. It's also me.
They're kind of talking past each other. I just wanted to make the point, though, that it is true, though, that if there is a hierarchy, if there is a lineage, which there is, that evolution says that, and so does organized religion says that. If there's a lineage, then there is a hierarchical causality. If there's a hierarchical causality, then there is morality, responsibility. If you're going to say that you matter at all or anything matters, and I know some people say that that's not true, but that's not really what anybody feels. Even if you do feel meaningless and like that nothing matters, the fact that makes you feel that's not a good feeling. It doesn't lead you to prosperity, like means that is it's probably not true. I mean, it isn't true, but I'm just saying, like, from the perspective of somebody who's skeptical to this idea. But also, you can't even say that it's the idea that there is no good and evil is consistent with Darwinism, or this Darwinian evolution narrative of the idea of survival of the fittest. It's like you're putting a value on survival already, which means that there is some good to not just dying. Like there is something good about that. There's something successful about that, and we don't use the same words in a lot of these discussions. We change the words even though the message is the same, and that kind of ends up causing a lot of confusion. but this leads to a lot of problems. But there is a good and evil. What she's talking about is whether or not it comes from within you or whether or not it's outside of us. It's both. But it's more important to just first know that evil exists. When I first started down this journey of trying to understand the world philosophically and what is the nature of reality and mind and which came from my political investigations and technological investigations, and that led me to trying to understand AGI and then consciousness, then fundamental reality. But before that, it was politics. And politics, what I first realized when I realized politics could negatively impact people, like laws can be passed that actually forbid you from exercising not just your rights of things that you would want to do because it's fun, like smoking weed or drinking, but also to do certain things that are your responsibilities, which is actually much more severe. Like if parental sovereignty is being undermined or overrided, or if your ability to defend yourself is being forbidden, like the ability to speak your mind is being restricted, like these things are where your responsibilities are now being forbidden, not just your rights to enjoy yourself. And I'm not saying that those aren't important, but they're not as important. Some of these things are it's not a requirement that you smoke weed or drink alcohol. And in fact, you probably would be better off not doing those things. And I say that as somebody who's done plenty of both of those things in my life. But at the same time, I do think you should have the right to do it. And that, life is usually about context. There is a time and place for most things, not all things, but most things. And, but that, even then, though, none of those are responsibilities. But the ability to defend yourself, the ability to speak what you think is true, these are your responsibilities. The ability to take care of your children and parent them the way that you see fit, that is your responsibility. And if that's being forbidden by politics, that's a problem. And I realized this, and I had like a political awakening. And I wrote something, and I only wrote the first page, but it was going to be a book, and it was titled "We Are All Evil." And it was about how our lack of context and our lack of firsthand understanding of issues, but can lead to problems when we are given power to make decisions on those issues that we don't have firsthand experience over, and it restricts people's abilities to enact and exercise their responsibilities. And it's evil, even though it doesn't seem like it's evil, because it's usually done with good intentions. But they say, the path to hell is paved in good intentions. That's very true. And but it's also, there's more to it than that. But we are all capable of doing evil actions when we don't have enough context to know the environment and big picture of that is contextualizing most fundamentally of the issue in which we are examining. You have to understand it firsthand, usually, in order to understand an issue well. But this is, I think it was, I forgot who said it, but someone, I've heard people mention that, like Jordan Peterson says, first, sometimes to see that good exists, you have to realize that evil exists. That was definitely the path for me. I remember when my boss, I've said this before, at my first job out of college, said to me something about how he was Mormon, and I was self-described atheist, but really an anti-theist. And he said that he thought morality was not relative. And I was like, that's crazy. The Nazis thought that what they were doing was good. But the thing is that we were talking past each other. Regardless of whether or not they thought that what they were doing was good, doesn't make it good. He wasn't saying that people don't think that what they are doing is, good, and that there isn't a relativistic nature or to our understanding of what is good. He was saying that there was an absoluteness to what is actually good. And I would have disagreed with him while trying to think about it, because I'd be like, what is good for someone is maybe not good for another person. That's actually not true if you see the big picture of things, I don't think. That's usually a false perspective due to you are looking at it from a very, very limited viewpoint. But the reality is that I would have felt that he was right, because I would, as a human being and as a Jew, I would not have argued that what the Nazis did was good. I would have said that was evil, but like, I would have just felt that. I wouldn't have been able to explain it at the time. Now I can, but it's like sometimes to realize that there is actually a good, which means like there is an affirmative thing that you should be doing, meaning like you have certain responsibilities. First you have to see that there is like an evil. And I think politically a lot of people are, these days at least, half of the people in politics, maybe a third of them, probably less than half, probably a third, are seeing that there's real evil in the world, even if they have not yet realized what is truly like I don't want to say the totality of what is good, because I'm not claiming that I know that, but that they haven't realized. I don't think the political narrative of even those people has shifted to responsibilities yet. It has shifted. It's still on, that's my right. It's not like, that's my responsibility, and that's more important than whether or not it's my right. But there is good, and there is that which is not good, which is emergently evil, but there is fundamentally only that which is good, and anything that which is not good is emergently evil. So they say, they talk about how science should be valueless, and it's assumed to be valueless. It doesn't place values on things. That's not possible. And it's just not possible to make sense of the world and do that. So, if science's job is to try and make sense of things, like, you cannot make sense of the world without assuming that there is value. So this is the last clip. Ask any final questions in the chat, and I will get to them before we leave.
Decisively, ideology plays into the equation, plays into the picture. So the great catastrophe of contemporary Western civilization resides in the fact that the educational system has been taken over almost lock, stock, and barrel by people of a given ideological bent. And they will tell you, well, we are only interested in the truth and so on and so forth, but it is the truth as they see it, and heaven help you if you don't see it too. So there is a kind of takeover of the educational system in the Western world by people of a basically atheistic bent, and this is not a good thing. It's a very dangerous thing. And I'm reminded of the words of Christ when he said that the children of this world are wiser than the children of light. I think there's a great deal of truth in that the people who are identified with that scientific religion, it is a religion, the people who are involved in that movement are, in a sense, wiser than the representatives of our churches and so on, because over the past 100 years, they have succeeded in taking over all the educational institutions, except a handful, but all the universities and big publishing houses and so on, they have control of it. And this creates a great, great problem, because we are losing our youth. Our youth, I mean, what chance does a 18-year-old young man or young woman have to stand up against the professor of whatever it may be? I tell you that just as much as information is being channeled into these young minds, disinformation also is going along the same channels, and in a sense, they often prove to be the more powerful of the two. So this is a big, big problem, and I must say that the West has not been wise. In the name of freedom and all these wonderful sounding things, they have, as it were, permitted a certain segment of ideologists to take over the entire educational system. How this problem will be resolved, I have no idea. But it's a major problem, and it's not good.
No, it's not. And I talk about this all the time on here. Whoa. Okay, come on. There we go. How this is, it's not just causing political and moral problems. It is hindering our our ability to advance our scientific understanding of the world. That we have anti-theists. There is no such thing as an atheist. I used to call myself an atheist for 24 years. I was an anti-theist. You can't be lacking an opinion on the nature of the universe. You either think it's a sentient being with goals and intentions, or you don't. And if you don't, then you're an anti-theist, not an atheist. There is no such thing as agnosticism about that question. Everybody interacts with the universe. We all have an assumption. Now, you can be more confident or less confident, but you do have kind of a best guess. If you aren't sure, even if you aren't sure, is the universe a sentient being with feelings and goals, or is the universe not? And that is what it comes down to. But the institutions, I don't believe, are easily going to be able to be swayed into moral theism. Even when we had organized religion and the Catholic Church in charge of science and things like that, yes, we made much more progress because it was more grounded in reality, but at the same time, there was still so much human sinfulness and ignorance and issues that infected it as well. Same thing. The temple that Christ, criticized, was the same thing. It was focused on God, but it was also corrupted by man. And I don't know if there is a way out of that other than, God resolving it through what religious people call the Messianic era, or what Chris Langan would, or some, people in the space of fundamental theories call like the human singularity. I don't think that it's possible to really solve that problem without that. But it has to be solved on a level that's not us. But we can improve things in certain, locations, and while acknowledging that, there's going to be issues that are persistent until that time comes, until we unite into a single sentient being again. There is going to be limitations and lack of context and therefore misunderstanding and sin and all kinds of things, but that are evil. But and also there's a reward system for telling people exactly what they want to hear, and not being exclusionary, but statements about absolute fundamental reality that are affirmative, not dismissive, but affirmative. They're not, it's possible, but it's like, no, it's this way. The universe is a single sentient being with goals. This is its goal. These are your responsibilities because of, who you are and the goal of this being. Those are very affirmative statements. And the institutions are governed by liability and inclusivity, but really what that means is an avoidance of making exclusive statements about meaningful truths that actually matter. They'll say things that don't matter about things that they claim are true and maybe are, relativistically true, but also don't matter. They'll tell you math equations and things like that, and but that doesn't matter. You don't need to know the Pythagorean theorem, for the most part. And if you do need to know it, then you will figure out a way to learn it on your own. You don't need to be taught it in school. But you need to know what your social responsibilities are, your family responsibilities are, and these are things that you can either outsource your parenting and the steering of your lineage to the state, which is going to guide it to oblivion, because it's not going to guide it towards anything. It's going to avoid making, a decision on where is north. or you can take it on yourself, which means not sending your kids to the institutions and kind of building new ones, which for a time will be better, and then they will get corrupted as well. And this is just something you have to expect. You have to accept, but that doesn't mean that you don't try and improve things. But yeah, we are in a conundrum, and that has been a fundamental message of this channel. The very first video on this channel is called "Escaping Our Academic Institutions," and it is about how atheism, quote unquote, which is really anti-theism, is destroyed science. Most of our our most celebrated minds in science today were all theists. Even Einstein was more of a theist than people admit. With that, huge thank you to Karen Wong, Richard Smith, and Wolfgang Smith for the stream. It is a wonderful talk. Link is in the description below to their whole discussion. Give the Meaning Code a follow. It deserves more subscribers for sure. There's so many great discussions on there. But very grateful for their talk and grateful for you. Please hit the like button, and I will see you next week. Peace.